Today we will cover two horrifying caving tragedies. The first story will leave you astonished. It's hard to imagine how anyone could think they'd make it through a crack barely wide enough for a laptop, while the second story is even more terrifying. As always, viewer discretion is advised. On August 18th, 15-year-old Tim Scumfield and his twin brother Tom set off on an adventure they'd planned for weeks. Growing up in Arkansas, the twins were no strangers to the outdoors. They'd spent their childhood exploring forests, lakes, and hills near their home. This time, they were heading for Devil's Den Cave, a popular Arkansas cave system known for its treacherous terrain and spelunking challenges. The hike to the entrance led them through thick forest. Insects buzzed around them, and the ground grew rough with stone. They passed the edges of clear lakes before finally reaching their goal, a dark opening in the hillside. Cool air drifted out from the cave's mouth, and without hesitation, the brothers stepped into the shadows of Devil's Den State Park. Devil's Den Cave was known for tight passages and deep drops, but to Tim and Tom, that was part of the fun. With headlamps lighting the way, they moved deeper underground. The Arkansas cave was both eerie and beautiful, smooth rock shaped by water, walls glittering with mineral deposits, and silence broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing through the narrow tunnels. The air grew colder as they moved deeper, but it was a narrow crack in the rock on the right that caught Tim's eye. Just 9 inches wide, it barely looks passable. Tom hesitated, suggesting they stay in safer areas, but Tim was already intrigued. He was always the bolder twin, drawn to risk and discovery in extreme cave exploration. Without waiting, Tim began squeezing into the crevice. It stretched 20 feet long, 15 feet high, and only 9 inches wide. The walls pressed tightly against him as he twisted and wriggled his way down. Then, without warning, his foot hit a weak patch of rock. It slipped. His left leg jammed instantly between 2 sharp walls. His right leg, already unsteady, slid off the slick surface, pulling his body into an awkward stretch. He was trapped, bent painfully, his lower body wedged and immobile. Panic set in fast. He shouted for Tom, voice echoing through the stone. His left leg was stuck tight, and his right leg had no grip. The rock had him pinned in this Devil's Den cave rescue nightmare. Pain shot through Tim's trapped leg, radiating up his knee and ankle. The pressure was unbearable. He couldn't shift, couldn't move. One side of his body stretched painfully, the other crushed tight against stone. It felt like his body was tearing apart.
Tom heard his screams and ran to the crevice. He crouched at the top, desperate to help, but the gap was too narrow. Tim was wedged deep, his leg completely stuck. Tom couldn't reach him, couldn't pull him out. He had no choice. He ran. Tom sprinted through the forest, heart racing, until he reached the park's visitor center around 5:30 p.m. He burst through the doors and told the rangers what had happened. Jeremy Bruce and Tim Scott, both seasoned park rangers in Arkansas, grabbed their rescue gear without hesitation. They followed Tom back toward the cave, moving fast as the sun dropped low, casting long shadows across the trail. When they reached the entrance, cool air poured out from the cave. Bruce and Scott paused only briefly before heading in, bracing themselves for what lay ahead in the tight, pitch-black tunnels of Devil's Den. When the rangers reached the crevice, they were shocked at how deep Tim was. The crack was so tight they could barely see him. His voice echoed faintly, strained with pain. It was clear this wasn't going to be a simple rescue. Tim's foot was wedged tight, and any wrong move could make the injury worse or push him even deeper into the rock. They had to act fast. The rangers pulled out tubular webbing and tossed one end down to Tim, telling him to wrap it around his torso. Despite the pain, Tim managed to secure the strap around his body. Bruce and Scott tried pulling him up, but the space was too narrow and Tim's body was twisted at an impossible angle. He screamed as the pressure on his leg intensified. Realizing they couldn't free him on their own, Bruce called for backup. By 7:50 p.m., cave rescuers in Arkansas arrived and quickly assessed the situation. Pulling Tim sideways wasn't an option. The only way out was straight up, and it had to be done carefully. One wrong move could make things worse. Using webbing, they formed a secure loop. Ranger Bruce climbed onto a ledge directly above the crevice, lowering the loop to Tim and guiding him to slip it under his arms and around his chest. Tim, drained and in pain, followed every instruction. Inch by inch, the team began to lift him. Each pull sent sharp pain through his leg, but he stayed focused. This was his only shot. Slowly, his foot began to come free. Bit by bit, the grip of the rock gave way. Finally, he was close enough for Ranger Scott to reach him. With one last pull, they hauled him out of the crevice. At 8:20 p.m., Tim was free. His legs were bruised and swollen, but somehow he had escaped without serious injury.
This next story is about a deep underwater misadventure that turned into a horrific nightmare.
It was February 2007, deep in the woodlands of North Florida. Among the clear springs scattered across the landscape was Allen Mill Pond Spring, calm on the surface but hiding a vast underwater cave system below. For Ron Simmons, 53, this wasn't just another spring. He was a seasoned cave diver and underwater cartographer, with a sharp eye for detail and a passion for mapping Florida's hidden depths. By Valentine's Day, Ron had completed 43 dives in the spring, logging over 2,500 feet of surveyed passages. Each dive added more detail to the map he was building. For Ron, it wasn't just exploration, it was documentation, capturing a world that most would never enter. Allen Mill Pond Spring is no easy dive. Even veteran cave divers face serious risks here. The tunnels are packed with fine silt, and the smallest movement can cloud the water instantly, dropping visibility to zero. Two winding conduits form a tangled three-dimensional maze underground. While the deepest point hits 46 feet, most of the system stays around 30 feet deep. Navigating such tight, complex spaces required more than skill, it demanded the right gear. Traditional back-mounted tanks wouldn't fit through the narrowest parts. Ron used side-mounted tanks instead, slung along his sides to help him slide through tight spots while still carrying backup air.
Roughly 200 feet in, Ron reached a familiar T intersection he had already mapped. According to his plan, he took the left tunnel, a section he hadn't fully explored yet. The passage narrowed quickly. He shifted his body to move through the tight space, careful not to stir the silt below. Beyond a tight restriction, the tunnel widened into a chamber with several narrow offshoots. Ron paused here and began his survey work, methodically measuring distances using a calibrated guideline, recording depths with his pressure gauge, and sketching passage dimensions onto his underwater slate. Step by step, he advanced deeper into the unexplored area, documenting every turn. After nearly 3 hours underwater, Ron had logged 238 feet, 72.5 meters, of new survey data, an impressive feat in a cave known for its difficulty. Still within the system's normal range. But around 300 feet, 91.4 meters from the entrance, something went wrong. When he checked his pressure gauges, a troubling reading stared back. His primary tank was draining much faster than it should have. It could have been a slow leak or the result of extra effort squeezing through narrow spots. Regardless of the reason, the numbers didn't lie. He no longer had enough air to guarantee a safe return. Ron quickly switched to his secondary tank, but the reading was no better. It held less air than anticipated. Now both tanks were running critically low, and he was still hundreds of feet from the exit. With no dive buddy to assist and no backup reserves stashed in the system, Ron was staring down every cave diver's worst fear, running out of air deep inside a twisting underwater maze. When Ron failed to return at his scheduled time, worry set in. Fellow cave diver Wes Skiles alerted local authorities, asking them to check for Ron's car at the main spring entrance, but the vehicle wasn't there. The next day, the search expanded. Wes and renowned diver Jill Heinerth discovered Ron's vehicle parked near a less conspicuous spring vent hidden deep in the woods. The Lafayette County Sheriff's Office was called immediately. Within 30 minutes, rescue and recovery teams began arriving. The quiet spring had become a flurry of urgent activity. Gear clanked, tanks hissed, and divers prepared for what everyone hoped was still a rescue. At 3:55 p.m. on February 15th, Mark Long entered the water for a reconnaissance dive. Moving with practiced precision, he swam 650 feet, 198 meters, into the underwater cave system. The water, crystal clear in most places but occasionally clouded by the disturbance of his passage, offered no sign of Ron. After nearly 3 hours of methodical searching, Mark surfaced empty-handed.
The team huddled to reassess. A close review of Ron's partially completed map and field notes offered a crucial realization. Mark had ventured into the wrong tunnel. The labyrinthine structure of Allen Mill Pond Spring meant that understanding Ron's mindset, his plan, his curiosity, was essential to finding him. At 5:06 p.m., armed with this new insight, Mark began a second dive. This time, he followed the route Ron had likely taken, stringing a guideline behind him for other divers to follow if needed. At 5:48 p.m., just 42 minutes later, Mark surfaced again, but this time, he wasn't alone. He brought back Ron's lifeless body. Ron had completed 43 successful dives in that very cave. No one could have imagined the 44th would be his last. The recovery of Ron's body revealed a series of haunting details about his final dive. He was found roughly 300 feet, 91.4 meters from the entrance, suspended in the water as if still swimming. One regulator was clenched in his mouth, the backup trailing behind, textbook redundancy for a diver of his caliber. Both tanks were completely empty. Data retrieved from his dive computer confirmed that Ron had never descended deeper than 28 feet, 8.5 meters during this exploration. But depth wasn't the danger here. The real threat was time. In one of the most sobering discoveries, his waterproof survey notes showed that Ron had mapped 238 feet, 72.5 meters of new cave passage on this very dive. Even as his situation grew more desperate, he never abandoned the meticulous work that had defined his legacy in the cave diving community. When his air began to run low, Ron didn't panic. His body position indicated calm, controlled movement, evidence that he was trying to conserve every last breath while making his way toward the exit.
But as he approached the 300-foot mark from safety, his second tank neared exhaustion. Still in a streamlined swimming position, Ron kept moving with quiet determination, inching toward the surface. Yet the distance was too great, and the remaining air simply wasn't enough. Ron's final moments were spent in motion, focused, steady, and intent on survival. He never gave in to panic, but the last of his breathable gas slipped away inside the darkness. Florida's underwater caves are as mesmerizing as they are merciless. Even with world-class training, redundant gear, and years of experience, cave diving leaves no margin for error. Running out of air in a submerged labyrinth is every diver's worst nightmare, one that this time could not be outrun.